Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for attending this morning's webinar on the SRA Price Transparency Rules. I'm David Gilmore, founder of DG Legal, and I'm very pleased that you've joined us. Today's topic is going to be presented by one of our newer consultants, Pat Estabrook, who joined at the beginning of this month. I'm absolutely delighted to have Pat on board. She's hugely experienced, and amongst very many other roles, she's been head of compliance at a very large law firm in the north of England. She's also been head of practice standards at the SRA and has also spent much time in different roles in the SRA, which I think puts her in a great position to talk about today's topic. Now, because there are a large number of people attending this webinar, we're not going to have interactive FAQs during the session. Instead, we'll ask you to email your FAQs, and then next week we will publish an FAQ together with a set of the PowerPoint slides. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Pat, and I hope you enjoy the morning's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay, so we move on to the actual transparency rules. They set out the information that authorised firms and individuals providing services to the public from outside should make available to clients and potential clients. And the rules come into effect at the 6th of December 2018. Please be aware that the rules don't apply to publicly funded work, so it's just the private sector at the moment. Why have the SRA put these rules in place? Their aim is to ensure that people have accurate and relevant information about a solicitor or firm when they're considering purchasing legal services, and that they then have an informed choice, theoretically improving competition in the market. One of the things I'd like to say is that the SRA have been very helpful with these rules, unusually so for them. There are a lot of templates and information on the SRA website, and at the end of the presentation, there'll be a link to those transparency rules which you can access yourself. Provides, as I say, templates and pricing guides, so hopefully you'll find that very helpful. So moving on to what they actually cover. For the members of the public, it will cover conveyancing, residential conveyancing, probate, motoring offences, employment tribunals, immigration, and for businesses, debt recovery, employment tribunals, and licensing applications for business premises. And we'll cover each of these in a little bit more detail to help you understand what you'll need to put on your website. Okay, so looking at what information is required then. Just to say as well, if you don't have a website, you must make the information available on request in other formats, so email, paper copies, whatever, if a client asks you for, or a potential client. So what information is actually required on your website? The pricing information must be presented in a clear and easy to understand format. You must specify exactly what's included within the price that's displayed, and it must be clear and accessible and in a prominent place on your website. Please don't hide it away somewhere under the privacy notices that you have. Clients have to be able to access it. You must provide a total cost, and where that's not possible, provide a range or an average of the costs. And you must explain the basis of your charges, including any hourly rate or fixed fees. Highlight any likely disbursements and their costs, and be clear as to whether VAT is included or not. For conditional or damage-based fees, explain when clients may have to make a payment, and we'll cover that a little bit more detail slightly on. If you do publish a range of costs, you need to set out the basis for your charges, including hourly rate and the type of factors that would determine what the final price will be. You have to be able to provide enough information for the client to determine what your likely costs will be. If you offer your services in different ways and the delivery model impacts on the price, make it clear. So for instance, if you charge a higher fee for face-to-face services than for strictly online services, make that clear to them. It will cost X amount for you to meet with the solicitors in the office. Highlight any services not included within the price, which a client may reasonably expect to be included. If you're using an online generator, that's absolutely fine. You don't need to specify what the price will be. The generator will do it for you. But it must produce a quote directly without requiring any additional contact from the firm. So, for example, if somebody calls to discuss the quote, that will be a breach of the rules. So, obviously within the generator, you'll need to provide a contact details for the client or potential client to be able to contact you. You need to provide information on key stages and typical timescales, and you need to publish the qualifications and experience carrying out the work of, anyone carrying out the work together with their supervisors. All of this information is quite bulky, as you'll see from the examples that the SRA has provided, and I would suggest that you do start with their templates as a basis for what you're going to do. Otherwise, it will take you quite a long time to set everything out in detail. When an unforeseen complexity arises, or the way in which a client asks you to proceed means any additional work, you should inform the client of this and provide a revised cost information. Okay, you can't then rely on the price that was generated at the beginning. We look now very briefly at conditional fee arrangements and damage-based agreements. If you want to assess the viability of a case before you agree to accept it to meet the requirements in relation to the provision of likely timescales, you should clarify on your website how long you will spend doing that assessment and what, if any, cost this will incur. So we're going to move on now to the specifics of each area, and moving on to conveyancing. Okay, so with conveyancing, the areas that are covered by the transparency rules are freehold sale or purchase, leasehold sale or purchase, or mortgages or remortgages. Okay, looking at the specific details, you need to be clear about any taxes that would be payable and explain that they will be additional to the price displayed. Suggest that you avoid providing an estimate of the actual tax payable, as this can be subject to change, and you could provide a link to an online tax calculator such as the one provided by HMRC. Outline any factors that would typically increase the cost of the service. For example, if the legal title is defective, part of the property is unregistered, you discover building regulations or planning permissions not been obtained, or if crucial documents you've previously requested from the client have not been provided. There's nothing to stop you providing an updated price quote, but you need to specify why that is. Okay. Have a look now at probate. We're only talking here about uncontested probate. It doesn't apply to litigation in probate. So the definition for the SRA is the collection and distribution of money, property and other assets belonging to a person following their death, where these are within the UK and the matters are not contested. So obviously any properties or any other monies outside the UK are not covered by the price guide. Again, looking at the detail of what you're required to publish, you have to publish prices for probate work in relation to the uncontested cases where the assets are in the UK, and this includes both testate and intestate and taxable and non-taxable estates. However, the charging model for these may well differ. You need to explain anything that could affect the price quoted, for instance, indicating that there's separate costs for preparing tax returns if that's not included in your ordinary pricing online. You may wish to consider whether you want to charge different prices based on the value of the estate, for instance, a percentage of the estate. If so, that needs to be made clear in the pricing guideline. Again, you need to be absolutely clear about any taxes that may be payable and explain these costs will be in addition to the price displayed. Again, try to avoid providing an estimate figure of the tax payable. Instead, provide a link to an online inheritance tax calculator such as HMRC, and this then puts the onus on the individual to identify what that tax amount will be for them. Okay, moving on now to the immigration area. This covers the preparation and submission of immigration applications, excluding asylum applications. It's the provision of advice and representation at the first-tier tribunal in relation to appeals against Home Office visa or immigration decisions, excluding asylum appeals. And the information that needs to be on your website would include considering documents, attending on the client, taking their instructions and providing advice, preparing and submitting the application, advising the client on timescales and the outcome of their application. And it should also be clear what's not included in the quoted fee and specify what disbursements, such as interpreter's fees, are included. You need to be clear about the interpreter's fees. These are difficult to estimate and can rack up and are a significant proportion of the overall cost to consumers. This means that even fixed fees may not always be particularly fixed. So just be clear on the website exactly what disbursements are going to be included and, more importantly, not included. Moving on now to road traffic offences. This is the provision of advice at the Magistrates' Court in relation to summary-only road traffic offences dealt with at a single hearing. Anything else, you don't need to put your prices on the website. And within that, those summary offences, what you need to provide is, if you do the work on an hourly rate basis, provide the rate and an estimate of the number of hours. And unless it's specified as an exclusion, the price displayed should include considering the evidence, providing evidence in relation to plea and likely sentence. Where you're not able to anticipate the likely sentence, advice on the options available to the court in relation to sentencing. Where appropriate, advice on whether in exceptional hardship or special reasons an argument could be made, and representation at a single hearing. Right, lastly, we've got employment tribunals. And again, this is in relation to providing advice to an individual, not a business. So it's the provision of advice and representation to employees in relation to the bringing of claims before the tribunal against an employer for unfair dismissal or wrongful dismissal. And if you can't provide the total cost of a service, you can provide the average cost or a range of costs instead. The SRA haven't prescribed what these ranges are, but they should be the best information you can provide based on your knowledge and your experience. One method of providing this information is to set out the normal range of costs for cases depending upon their complexity. And if you follow this model, you need to set out some factors to help consumers determine whether their case is likely to be simple, medium, or high complexity. Again, you need to be looking at disbursements in this as well. At the moment, of course, there are no fees for the employment tribunal. That may well change in the future. I know that they're looking at that, and if that changes, you need to be aware of those changes and change your website accordingly. You need to explain the position as well if there are other claims being brought within the wrongful or unfair dismissal claim, such as discrimination. Does this impact on the cost estimate? You need to be considering that, and if it does, you need to be explaining why. Moving on then, we're only going to cover this briefly. It's services in relation to businesses. Everything we've discussed earlier applies here in any event. So the provision of advice and representation to employers in relation to defending claims before the employment tribunal brought by an employee for unfair dismissal or wrongful dismissal. Debt recovery up to the value of £100,000 and the provision of advice and assistance in representation in relation to licensing applications for business premises. I'm not going to go into any detail with these. I say that what we discussed earlier, that covers this in any event. If you've got specific questions on these areas, please include them in the questions of the to DG Legal. Another requirement is that you provide details of staff. You've got to give an overview of the experience of the individuals dealing with each type of matter and the details and experience of the supervising staff member. This is an area that I've had a number of questions about, and people are quite uncertain about what they need to put in there. So I've got an example here. Okay, so this lady is the partner overseeing the wills and probate department. It lists her experience, her position within the firm, when she qualified. Those are the type of things that you need to be putting in there. But you also need to bear in mind at the same time the data protection regulations. So there's a bit of a balancing act there. Any of these queries about this type of thing, if you're a retainer client, you can contact DG Legal and they'll be able to assist you by checking anything that's needed and looking at anything you want to post on the website. A further requirement of the transparency rules is that you now need to publish on your website details of your complaint handling procedure, which has always been best practice anyway, details of how and when a complaint can be made to the legal ombudsman and the timescales for that, and details about how and when a complaint can be made to the SRA and the type of complaints that can be made. You need to make it clear that it's a conduct issue, not a service issue. Many of you will already have that on your website, but these are requirements, and again, they have to be there by the 6th of December. Finally, we have the digital badge. Historically, all firms have been prohibited from displaying the SRA or the Law Society's logo. The SRA has now decided that it would be more beneficial to firms to be able to demonstrate that they are regulated by the SRA. So the transparency rules will require regulated firms to display the SRA digital badge. Don't know what it looks like yet because they haven't shown it to us. The badge will be available to download from the 6th of December, but you won't have to display it until spring 2019. They haven't given a date yet. They're just being fairly open with that. But if it's available, then there's no reason for you not to put it on your website. Please check your website and check your My SRA. You can only use the badge if the SRA have an accurate address for your firm. If your website address on the My SRA isn't accurate, clearly they're not going to be able to authorize the digital badge, and it will be a requirement. So you need to go away, check your My SRA details, ensure that your website is up to date on My SRA. So the next steps. If you've got any questions, email teamadmin@dglegal.co.uk with transparency rules in the heading. The presentation, any responses to the frequently asked questions and useful link guide will be produced next week and sent out to you. And if you've got any further assistance, for instance, you want retainer support or training for staff, contact DG Legal by phone or by email. As I said, if you're a retainer client, DG Legal will assist by checking any information that you want to post on the website in advance of the 6th to the 12th, but you'll need to get your queries in so that they can provide that information for you in that assistance. Thank you very much for listening to this webinar, and I hope you found it useful.